This is
Make it plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been too long since we've had our good friend on the show. He continues to do the great work that he does vis-a-vis dcreport.org. Check out the site, stay informed, truly objective reporting going on there. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's the author of The Making of Donald Trump, which was truly a seminal work when Donald Trump came into power, and was very informing, that book was, to all of us about what really made this guy tick and where did he come from. He's also a consultant on Netflix's House of Cards. Here's his latest book, The Big Cheat: How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. We all know that, but it's significant when it is documented in the detail that David Cay Johnston has documented it in. David Cay Johnston, welcome back to Make It Plain. How are you, buddy?
I'm great, Mark. Thank you for having me on again.
It's always a pleasure to see you and to hear you. You have been, probably more than anybody else, chronicling and documenting the types of things Donald Trump has been doing. And now we're talking about the actual of fleecing of America. Why, some of the mainstream media, or the Beltway media, I should say, seemingly has moved on from this type of investigation and research and reporting. Why do you think that is, and why have you continued to do it, and why do you think it's important that we continue to document this?
Well, Donald Trump, who I've known and covered for more than 33 years, is, first of all, understand, a master, in fact, I would argue the world's greatest con artist. He conned himself all the way into the White House with no qualifications to do so. And the news organizations in America are not set up to cover con artists and crazy people. The assumptions of mainstream journalism, and I spent 40 years at papers like the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times, they do a very, very good job within the parameters of how they see news. But somebody like Donald comes along and they don't know what to do. And I'll give you an example of this. When Trump announced his campaign on June 16th, 2015, I immediately dropped everything I was doing. And since then, that's all I've done is Donald Trump. Started DC Report because of Donald Trump, with former senior journalists at the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and the New York Times. Because we knew that conventional mainstream media wouldn't know how to cover him. They wouldn't understand it. And when he announced and he made all those horrible racist comments, Mexicans and being rapists and murderers, the New York Times report the next day didn't even quote that, because they would go, oh, well, that's crazy stuff. I mean, that happened to me when I worked there. They would say, we're not going to write about these far-right people because they're just crazy fringe people. They're not significant. And I finally did get a lot of stuff in, but in the beginning I had to fight for it. And my book starts out with what I call the original lie. Donald Trump makes this announcement in Trump Tower, and he goes, there are thousands of people here. Mark, you've been to Trump Tower. You couldn't get thousands of people in there if you tried. And then every time he makes the most outrageously false, and in many cases just blatantly racist, misogynistic, bigoted comments, he gets wild rounds of applause. I'm sorry, this is Midtown Manhattan. Where would he find people to do that? And I thought to myself, did he bust them in from West Virginia? Well, the very next day we find out that they were paid actors. They got $50 each if they showed up and applauded on cue, creating this false impression of support. The New York Times never reported that until several years later, and then in passing, I believe in a reference to me. Lots of news organizations never reported the fact that he started his campaign with these paid actors. And from that point forward, what we've had is pretty good coverage when he was president of the palace intrigues. I think the political reporters did a good job on the politics, but not the substance, and not what he did to our government, and especially not what the big cheat does, which is give you a narrative where I've taken all these loose threads about this scandal and that financial scandal and this misuse of public funds and this, submarining American national security to make money. And I've woven them into a tapestry so that people can understand this as a story. Because people, an article appears in the Washington Post, or then one appears in the LA Times, then one appears in the Wall Street Journal. Even if you're me focused on this, you can't follow it all and make sense of it. And when I wrote the book, that was one of the things I discovered, Mark, was, oh boy, I didn't grasp the significance of that at the time, or I forgot about this, or I actually don't remember seeing something. So I picked the best stories and wove them together so people could understand, hey, this is how these people were systematically going about subverting our government for themselves. Because to Donald Trump, the presidency and him, of course he should be president, and anything he does is proper. And how dare you question what he does? He's the greatest person who's ever lived in his own mind.
Yeah. And what you've also done, and I think this is very important, is kind of give us a one-stop shop, pun intended, in terms of all of his financial improprieties. Because I think if more people focused on that would be enlightening.
More MIP after this message.
So let's just kind of walk down this road a bit. First of all, the golf courses. And what I mean, well, really the golf courses and the hotel, all of these, his time in government enriched those institutions and lined his own pockets with money, right? I mean, Jimmy Carter gave up his peanut. I mean, that was a huge story. And I was just a kid. I was a teenager. As a teenager, I remember that, David. Jimmy Carter gave up his peanut farm. I was like, okay. I mean,
it was a peanut warehouse that in the world of peanuts was insignificant. It's a little small town single warehouse for the nearby farms. And oh my God, the scandal of this. So he put it in a blind trust. The guy running it ran it into the ground, and they sold it at a loss after he left the White House. But that's the right thing to do. George W. Bush, for all the terrible things I can tell you about his policies, he put his money into a real blind trust. Barack Obama, who was a reasonably wealthy man when he entered the White House, not as wealthy as George W. Bush, he put his money into treasuries. I mean, what? No conflict. Donald Trump, oh boy, how much money can I get out of these businesses? So, Mark, did you watch the motorcade when Trump left the Capitol after he was inaugurated and went to the White House? So you noticed, first thing people noticed or should have noticed was very sparse crowds. In many places, there were more law enforcement and troops than there were supporters, unlike Barack Obama, where people were curbed to the wall, packed in like sardines.
Right.
The motorcade stops, and the family gets out for 2 minutes and takes a turn on the asphalt on Pennsylvania Avenue. Not one of the TV stations that I saw, the networks or PBS, pointed out that he stopped in front of Trump Washington Hotel. But you can bet your bottom dollar that every single lobbyist, envoy, spy, every sophisticated person who would want to seek favors from the Trump administration, they knew exactly where it stopped. And they got the message, which is, you want a favor from Donald Trump, you will demonstrate it by paying tribute to me. And the Saudi Arabians, they rented at one point 2 whole floors at top dollar. When T-Mobile, the cell phone company, wanted to buy Sprint, which the Obama administration had denied, the head of T-Mobile, John Legere, and I tell about this in the book also, he made a show of renting a room there and suites and bringing other executives and having them stay there and spend a lot of money. At one point, the restaurant was taking in money at the rate of, just the restaurant and bar, $25 million a year. Anybody in the restaurant business would go, what? How? What? $25 million a year for a hotel, bar, and restaurant. And from day one, the effort here was to turn this into a business, turn the White House into a business. And our national security was for sale, and I document that in the book. We sold our national security to help Jared Kushner get out of his terrible deal where he bought 666 Fifth Avenue in New York, just down the street from Trump Tower, at 2 to 3 times what it was actually worth. He tried to get the Qataris, the government in Qatar, to bail him out with a loan, and they said no. Now, Qatar is strategically critical to us. It's where the U.S. military central command has its big base for the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And when they said no, then they went to the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis, who are deeply opposed to the Qataris for many reasons, including the fact that the Qataris don't go around beheading people for praying for a better government. The Saudis do. And Donald Trump began attacking Qatar and accusing them of being terrorist financiers. Well, the Qataris do finance 2 terrorist organizations. The Saudis finance 60 of them and spend far more money. And why did they do this? Because guess what? Jared Kushner finally got the financial deals he needed, not from the Qataris, and Trump punished the Qataris. And this got very, very little attention in the news, and where it did, it was written for diplomats and generals. It was not written for you and me.
Yeah. That's important to acknowledge. So just out of curiosity, what's the status of the hotel now?
Donald Trump actually lost money on the hotel during the 4 years of the presidency. He would have lost a lot more if he hadn't been president, because there are a lot of people who needed to pay tribute, but there were an awful lot of people who just stayed away. They didn't want to be associated with that hotel in any way. And he's now
and it was overpriced, wasn't it? I mean,
yes, it was. It was very expensive. Even among the top hotels in DC, it was very expensive. And I used to be in the hotel business on the side. I was the founder of a tiny little hotel management company, but it's a business I understand very deeply. Okay. He has now negotiated to sell this to an arm of the same company that owns the Hilton Hotel brand to get out of it, because once he's out of the White House, nobody's going to go there to pay tribute to him anymore. You don't have to pay tribute to him anymore. And secondly, a lot of people are going to continue to stay away because of the Trump name. You know, the people Trump appeals to, they can't afford his hotels. Mm-hmm. You know, and the business leaders in this country, I think most of the business leaders in this country make it pretty clear that they want to be away from Donald Trump and stay away from him.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the golf courses, people would come there and spend money. But isn't it also, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't it also true? Just his presence there at the golf courses with the Secret Service it was a way for the federal government to spend money at the golf courses that's still so even the services that the government provided him as president enriched him personally and privately, right?
So when he would go to Mar-a-Lago, the rooms Secret Service agents would rent were charged at the highest rack rate, which nobody ever pays except, you know, when Super Bowl is in town. When he would play golf, which he did every couple of days, remember he said, I'll never play golf if I'm president. I'll never go to my golf courses because there's so much to do here in the White House. He charged the highest rate he could justify for the use of the golf carts. And in fact, when Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan, came to see him right after the inauguration, and Donald famously, after hearing Shinzo Abe complain about how much Lockheed was charging to sell them military aircraft, he picked up the phone, he called the chairman of Lockheed, he got him to agree to lower the price. I don't know whether that ever went through, but at least that's what happened at the moment. Obviously acting against the interests of Lockheed, American workers, in favor of Japanese taxpayers. Donald had a photo op with Shinzo Abe, and I have the invoice showing that he charged $3.15 for each of the glasses of water that were put on the table in case one of them wanted a sip of water. He did not miss anything, right down to $3.15 each for a glass of water for a photo prop.
Wait, David. You mean like the water we get when we're in the restaurant, they just keep refilling the glass?
Yeah.
He charged for that?
$3.15 for 2 glasses. So $6.30. I have the invoice.
Oh my God.
And the point of that story is, I mean, the amount of money is insignificant, right? But the point of that story is there was not one opportunity to make money that his staff let go by. And you may recall about 30 years ago, the old Spy magazine did a thing where they sent refund checks, bogus refund checks, to a bunch of billionaires. And then everybody who cashed them, they were like for $1.80. Everybody who cashed them, they sent them a new check for like half of that, 90 cents. And everybody who cashed those, they created a new business and they sent them a check till they got down to 13 cents. And the only two people who cashed the checks were Donald Trump and the arms merchant Adnan Khashoggi. And it shows, Donald, I mean, it cost him more than 13 cents to collect the 13 cents in terms of his staff time. But every opportunity to make money off the presidency Trump did. And it's really important people understand this is, however cynical you may be, former presidents didn't behave this way. There's been relatively petty, there's some petty dealings here and there, but they're really petty nonsense. This was wholesale monetizing of the White House.
Yeah.
More MIP after this message.
Talk to us, if you would, about Ivanka. Again, this is something that was mentioned, but it didn't get, other than your reporting, also didn't get a lot of attention. Ivanka and her relationship with China and patents.
Yeah. Ivanka Trump, it's very difficult to get a patent or a trademark or a service mark that is intellectual property from the Chinese government if you're not Chinese. And it is very costly. It takes a long time. You're going to pay a lot of money to Chinese lawyers. And at the end of the day, you may not get anything. She, in record time, like the snap of a finger, she got a slew of trademarks and service marks, including, by the way, for voting machines. I know there's no indication she's in the voting business, but why did she get intellectual property protection in China for voting machines? By the way, a country that's a dictatorship, so voting is not an issue in China. But she got all these approvals, and President Xi, the dictator in China, was very smart about this. He's a very, very smart strategic thinker. He did these just before he met with Donald at Mar-a-Lago. There was no question what was going on here. This was currying favor with Donald Trump by doing something for his daughter. And you may also recall that she had a dress line. And you'd go into department stores, and there were these Ivanka Trump dresses. And I am told by the women in my family, I have 5 daughters and my wonderful wife, that they're pretty good dresses. And they were quite reasonably priced. They didn't sell. So they were taken back. The labels were cut out. They put in new made-up labels, and then the dresses sold. She wasn't particularly good at her grifts. But, her incompetence in business is not the point. It's the president of China knew how to play Donald Trump like a cheap fiddle, and he did.
Yeah. The payday lending industry, too. Tell us about that relationship.
So payday lenders in America are funded by the big Wall Street banks. That's the first important thing to know. This isn't a bunch of scummy people you never heard of. This is Wall Street, big banks, JP Morgan, places like that, Citicorp, that fund the payday lenders and the car title lenders. And the Obama administration had been working on reining them in. Elizabeth Warren's big accomplishment, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which got back for consumers about $4 or $5 for every dollar it cost to operate, showing it was an enormously successful. That was one of the principal things attacked immediately by the Trump administration. They want the payday lenders to do whatever they want. Remember, Donald Trump ran for office saying he was going to run against Wall Street. He was going to control Wall Street. So how did the payday lenders show their appreciation? Well, they paid tribute to Donald Trump by moving their annual convention to the Doral Country Club and Golf Resort in Miami, which Donald owns. And there were a group of ministers who demonstrated outside the gate about this. But the payday lenders, the major polluters, particularly coal-burning electric generating plants, and others who are doing harm to the country, these were the people Trump was out helping. He wasn't out helping, businesses that get caught in some regulatory situation where they're being treated unfairly. He was out helping people who are badly motivated. And the payday lenders are right at the top of this list. I mean, these are people engaged in really despicable practices that were, by the way, criminal 40 years ago, before the courts, not the legislature, the courts changed the law in decisions I've written about in other books. But he totally embraced these people. And why? Well, because he doesn't know anything, and he's fundamentally in league with those who are rich against everybody who isn't.
Yeah. And then the money, he raised millions of dollars. You write about this too, I know. He raised millions of dollars for Stop the Steal. But even that was stealing.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. Mark, Donald Trump is America's beggar-in-chief. His business today is panhandling. He just does it in a digital, sophisticated sort of way. But he's no different than the person stopping you outside the grocery store asking for $1. And in his case, it's about $500 million he's raised. He said this was to stop the steal, when there was, of course, no steal. He only spent $9 million of it on lawyers' fees. And under federal law, he can spend the rest of it on himself. And he's going to be indicted soon in Manhattan and probably a couple of other places, but I'm certain in Manhattan. Criminal defense lawyers, knowing that Donald has a long history of not paying his lawyers, remember he famously said, "I'm not going to pay Rudy Giuliani because he didn't like the outcome." They're going to demand full payment up front. And I would expect to represent Donald Trump in his criminal defense in New York, $30-50 million up front, that kind of money, really serious money. Because once you step in for him, you're stuck with him. The judge isn't going to let you walk away if you say, "Oh, he didn't pay me." Well, tough luck. You signed on. You worry about collecting later. So he's going to need a lot of money for that. And I understand people who hate America as it is. They want his theme, "Make America White Again." They want women and racial minorities to know their place. They want religious people whose religion they don't like out of the country. I get that. I'm appalled by it, but I get it. What I don't get are people who know, I've interviewed them, who know that this is a grift, and yet they keep sending him money. And it tells you how we made a lot less progress, and I'm sorry about the sound outside.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
We've made a lot less progress in civil rights than I think any of us imagined. All Donald Trump had to do was give permission to people to let their inner racist and inner bigot out. And those people really deeply support Donald Trump. And it's appalling. I mean, it's appalling on many levels. And yet we're going to have to contend with this for a long time as he continues raising money from people who believe he's coming back to be president in 2025. I don't believe, by the way, he will ever be president again.
Well, I pray not, and I hope your book helps to prevent it. But so at the moment, what is he specifically? He's raising money now for his reelection campaign.
He's raising for a bunch of things. I get several emails a day from Donald Trump and text messages to send money for this, and I love the ones that say things like, from Don Jr., "My father asked me about you last night because you're the only person who didn't respond to our request earlier today to send money for Y." Well, if you're a moron, you're going to believe Donald Trump cared about Mark Thompson didn't send money. It's just a marketing ploy. And they're very good at their fundraising in this regard. You got to respect that he's hired people who know how to squeeze money out of folks. But that money is going to end up primarily for Donald's lifestyle and for lawyers. By the way, interesting thing about Donald Trump, who claims to be a multi-billionaire. I revealed in 1990 he had a negative net worth story that drove him crazy. He has that 757 Boeing jet. It's a 35-year-old airplane, but it's a 757. It's a jumbo jet. And it's sitting at the airport in Westchester, New York. It's been there for almost 5 years because it has a blown engine. Now, a real billionaire would go borrow an engine from somebody, have it put on the plane. He'd fly it down to the place in Louisiana that does the engine work on Boeing 757s and give the engine back and then have a new engine put on. And you're looking at more than $1 million probably to do that. He hasn't done it. Nobody in their right mind parks an expensive jet in the weather of New York. That's why we have these big places out in the desert in California and Arizona where the jets are, because you don't park them in a damp environment. You can ruin the airplane. I suspect the airplane isn't airworthy anymore. But that Donald Trump didn't get it fixed tells you he didn't have a spare $1 million around, which is kind of unusual for a guy who claims to be worth $10 billion.
That's a profound revelation, indeed, David Cay Johnston. Lastly, have you been able to put, in terms of at least what he did in the 4 years in office, a whole dollar figure on how much he fleeced, how much he and his family were enriched?
Well, Donald reported that his businesses, he had to make an annual report required by law, that he asked if he could make without signing it under penalty of perjury. And he was told, no, you got to sign this under penalty of perjury like everybody else. And it shows more than $1.6 billion of revenue, of which a couple $100 million would have come from taxpayers because of the Secret Service and other things using his facilities. Jared and Ivanka, their reports, they're done in ranges. They're not specific numbers. The low number would be 172 million. The high is 640. I suspect that it's more towards the higher number. So in both cases, the two families took in more than $1 million a day in gross revenue. Now, that's not personal income in Trump's case. That's business revenue. And he has expenses running the businesses. And then you look at the financial deal that allowed Jared Kushner to keep his family from collapse. That Middle East money we talked about early on.
Right.
You're looking at $1 billion swing there. And Jared Kushner right now is building a investment fund that he would run, which he's seeking billions of dollars from the Saudis and the Emiratis and others in the Middle East. And then we remember, and there's a whole chapter about this, Trump raised $107 million for his inaugural. The previous record was Obama's at $53 million, and they didn't even need to spend all of that. There's no way he spent that kind of money. And I have a chapter not only about what happened to that money, who got it, but also about how they tried to lure Melania Trump's best friend into criminal activity. And at first she didn't even understand the request. And then it was like, I'm not doing that. What is wrong with you? But there's a lot of money we haven't seen yet, I assure you, that was put into the Trump organization from Russians, people in the Middle East, Kazakhs, and others. We just haven't seen the record of. And that's why we really need Congress to thoroughly investigate not just January 6th, but every dollar that flowed into any account connected to Donald Trump.
It suggests to me, David, obviously it's documented, he's a failure at everything except fleece and grift.
Yeah.
It suggests to me that even if he doesn't run or doesn't win, he could continue to hustle people this way for the rest of his days, couldn't he? People still want to give him money.
Right. That's what I expect him to do. I mean, the golf course business, with a very few exceptions like Bandon Dunes, Oregon, which I've written about extensively, it's a money-losing business. It's not a very profitable business. The other enterprises he has, we know that many of them are badly managed and they're not doing well. And he has big debts coming up. Maybe he'll be able to refinance them. But Donald Trump is not a businessman. Let me be very clear. He is the third generation head of a 4-generation crime family. They're a white-collar crime family. So they don't break legs, but they steal with an ink pen and with contracts and with false promises. And his grandfather, who was a draft dodger from Germany and a pimp, and who lied to get his American citizenship. He lied to get his American citizenship. His father, who ripped off the taxpayers, as he acknowledged, he didn't acknowledge it was a ripoff, but Congress said it was, for about $40 million in today's money in building low-cost housing for returning World War II veterans. Eisenhower, when he found out what Fred Trump, Donald's father, had done, threw a fit in the White House, and 100 auditors were put on him. But at the end of the day, he got to keep the money, which is typical of how these things go, by the way. And
Right.
Donald, runs a crime family, and the Kushner wing of that, and his other two sons, they're the next level of that. And we have lots of crime families in America that are not mafia. They're quote unquote business people, but they're really racketeering enterprises.
Folks, read all about it. The Big Cheat, the latest book by our friend David Cay Johnston, The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. Great investigative reporting here. Also follow him every day at dcreport.org. And he's on Twitter and all the other social media as well. Hey, man, appreciate you. Thank you for keeping the public informed, all of us informed about this. And this is important, folks, because as we said, this dude is running a hustle. It's not about, people think this is about some other cultural thing. He is, even in the culture piece, people who are fed into that, sending in their little nickels and dimes, are enriching him and not themselves. He is ripping everyone off.
Mark, one of the things I'll assure your readers is you may think you know what happened with him and the money because you paid close attention. This is my entire life. Researching the book, I learned things I either didn't appreciate or understand or know about. You will learn through a narrative that anybody who went to high school can understand about the financial shenanigans by Trump and his cronies, and they should deeply trouble you. Don't be cynical. Oh, yeah, well, he's out of office, because there are other people waiting in the wings who want to be our dictator. Some of them are in the United States Senate, and they will do the same thing if we don't understand what they did, how they did it, and as I show at the end of the book, how to prevent this, which isn't that difficult if we have the political will.
Yeah, folks, please. The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. Thank you, David Cay Johnston, as always, buddy.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.